Welcome on in, everybody. Thursday night live here at Auburn Undercover. My name is Nathan King, joined here by Jason Caldwell. Got our mega preview show tonight for you guys on Thursday. Previewing, obviously, Auburn basketball. Huge matchup on Saturday. Top 10 matchup against the Tennessee Volunteers. Junior day as well. Christian and Jason are going to get into that later on in the show. But we'll start out here talking about number 1 Auburn taking on number 6 Tennessee. Kind of crazy to think about that this is the first top 10 matchup ever between these teams. It is the first top 10 matchup in the history of Neville Arena. Also crazy to think about. You look at some of the past home games that have been really big for Auburn, and they've been a good team. It's been like right on the edge. You know, the game a few years ago, right before they were number 1, Kentucky was number 12. And so they've had a few games like that. But the first of what could be 3 top 10 games when you got Florida and Alabama coming in here later this year. And so we kick things off on Saturday. Jason, we just got done sitting down with Bruce Pearl for the weekly media availability on Zoom today, going back to our Zoom roots from 2020. Obviously, we're still university still being cautious about ice and snow in the area, so not asking anybody to travel to campus. But Jason, this is, as we have come to expect from Rick Barnes, a tremendous defensive test. Tennessee is phenomenal. And for Auburn on the other end, this is one of the best offenses in the country. And so executing will obviously be at a premium, and we'll see if they end up having Janai Broome for this game. That would obviously help out in a big way.
Yeah, and that's still to be determined. The good thing nowadays, I guess, is that we'll know by the time we get to game whether or not he's going to be available at all. It's kind of sounds like it's going to be leaning towards a questionable, doubtful scenario instead of completely out, because Bruce Pearl said, hey, look, we'll see what happens later this week, next couple of days with practices. And that probably even includes Saturday morning shoot around, since it's such a late game on Saturday night. You'll have some time then. Listen, we've seen, Janai Broome in a boot, which was the first good news, that he wasn't on crutches. This wasn't one of those scenarios where he's riding around on a scooter. He was in a boot. So that was the best news to start with. We've seen him walking. Saw him last week over at the football complex, using some of their rehab facilities. And so, it'll probably depend on the flexibility, soreness, all those things, and kind of what that looks like for Janai Broome. But no matter what, in this scenario, you're facing, other than Houston, probably the best defensive team that Auburn's going to see this year. When you look at Tennessee, I mean, the numbers are just pretty incredible. You're going to 58 points a game. Teams are shooting 36% from the floor. And you look at it rebounding, they're out rebounding their opponents 38-30. And so, and all the while, they don't really have a dominant big man. This is not the team that we've seen to have these big dominant big men for Tennessee. Now they're athletic and they're still pretty long, but you don't see a big dominant big man that you look at it and go, yeah, that guy is just incredible. Igor Milicic is the guy, probably the guy for them. 10 points, 8 rebounds a game. Now, he's a big guy, but they don't run the offense through him, 6'10", 225. So different type of team than we've seen from the past in Tennessee. But Nathan, one thing that still kind of runs it for them, and that's out front with Zakai Ziegler.
Yeah, I mean, a guy that I talked to Stephen Pearl this week, and he said, I feel like Ziegler's been there since I was at Tennessee.
Correct.
He's crazy. He's only a 4th-year senior. He's not a 5th-year guy.
It's kind of had that feel of Jarquez Hunter for Auburn football opponents.
I was just going to say that.
Yeah, because he's been playing since he walked on campus.
Correct.
And he's been such a big part of things for them. And this may be the biggest challenge for Auburn's point guard group, because they haven't handled a whole lot of pressure great and have turned it over a bunch, but he will be the turnover enforcer that maybe Auburn hasn't faced this whole year.
Yeah, I thought it was appreciate Stephen for talking to us earlier this week while we didn't have Bruce until Thursday, and he kind of gave some early keys to the matchup, and he said exactly that. Ziegler and Meshack for them, just really stiff physical guards. And they do a really good job of limiting assists. They don't necessarily, looking at their numbers here, I mean, they don't force a ton of turnovers, 46 national. I mean, that's a lot. But what they do is just that really solid perimeter defense that they play. 3-point shots, number 1 3-point defense in the country.
Yeah. And what they do is they may not force a ton of turnovers, but when you get steals, those lead to fast break points. And that's the thing about them. They had those two guys you mentioned have 77 combined steals this season. So you're talking about plays that happen on the court. These aren't dead ball turnovers. These are live ball turnovers that lead to transition. Those are the ones that are really, really harmful for teams. And that's what Tennessee does, maybe more so than just forcing you to turn the ball over.
Yeah, and Steven talked about it. They're going to want Zakai Ziegler to shoot the ball. They're going to want possessions to end with the ball in his hands. If he keeps his current pace, he's going to lead the SEC in assists for the second straight year. And a big part of that is because, Jason, they lose Dalton Connect, of course, goes on to be a first-round pick, but they pick up Chaz Lanier, a North Florida transfer, a guy who just absolutely lit it up. And he is, I think Janai Broome is the best player in the SEC, but I think Lanier is going to have his say in the Player of the Year conversation. That matchup against Chad Baker-Mazara in particular is going to be huge on Saturday.
Yeah, in terms of scoring, you look at scoring alone, and that's such an important part of things when you start talking about it. And that's what Chaz Lanier's done, and it's crazy. We've seen Janai Broome, and we know kind of his road and what he's done. Chaz Lanier from North Florida. You look at him at North Florida as a sophomore, just 2 years ago at North Florida, 4.5 points a game. And then he goes a junior, 4.7 points a game, 22-23. Senior, and now he's a grad senior, but boy, it jumped up a lot when you look at what he did in 19.7 points a game. And now you look at Tennessee, and he's just gone crazy. And the thing about him, and when you watch him play, is that I won't say it's all or nothing, but he is a volume shooter. He's going to shoot the basketball, and when those first couple fall, well, then it's kind of lights out. And his numbers from three especially are just, it's kind of overwhelming a little bit. He's 69 of 162. So you're talking about 20 games roughly, 162. This guy's averaging 8 3 attempts a game. He is going to shoot the basketball, and so you cannot let him get comfortable. Auburn does a good job of that. I think this is a huge game for Dylan Cardwell and Chaney Johnson. Those two guys, shot blockers. Auburn's done a great job of making people drive to the basket and funneling guys to those two guys. I think that's what you want from this game. Tennessee, they want to shoot the basketball. Can you funnel them inside and make them uncomfortable? I think that's a huge part of this game.
Yeah, look, if Janai is available, that's another layer to
Absolutely.
this thing that obviously gives Auburn an even better chance for itself on defense. But look, Bruce Pearl pointed it out today. Dylan Cardwell may not have the numbers and the statistics right now. Now, per 100 minutes, per 40 minutes, he absolutely has the efficiency right now. But him and Chaney Johnson continue without Broome in the lineup. They did last game as well. Didn't score that much.
4 points.
Yeah, just 4 points, but continued to have that impact on defense. Yeah, I think you're exactly right, Jason. Denver Jones and Baker-Mazara and Miles Kelly, as well. Those guys have evolved and settled into really stout perimeter defenders. However, Auburn is still number one in the country in block shots. It's because everything funnels there, and they do a really, really good job at the rim. In this game in particular, obviously that's going to be really, really important. Looking at, Jason, as we talk about some other matchups here on Saturday, you mentioned Tennessee without having a true big man. Jonas Adu was the one for them last year. He transfers to Arkansas. I think Auburn could have some opportunities to put the ball on the floor, but at the same time, you look at it, and Tennessee is number 9 nationally in block shots. Their 2-point field goal percentage is number 23 in the country, so they do a really, really good job of limiting things at the rim. So I think this is a game, and I asked Bruce Pearl about it today, and he brought up a good point. He said, look, we don't need to necessarily get hung up on the assist numbers. Auburn's had single-digit assists the last 2 games because you look at Georgia in particular, like neither team was hitting a lot of shots, so you're not going to, in turn, even if it's a good pass, you're not going to get a ton of assists. I think this is the kind of game you're not going to ask your team against this defense to do what they did against Mississippi State, where it's so many individual plays, so much one-on-one basketball. They did a really good job, shot the ball really well against Miss State. I think this is the game where the facilitation of the offense needs to step up a little bit, because that's what you have to do. Tennessee has only allowed 70 points in 4 games this season. Execution absolutely is the number one thing for Auburn on Saturday.
Yeah, I think so. And I think it's both ends, because I think defense will help you in getting offense. The reason why teams don't score a ton against Tennessee too is because they get a bunch of offensive rebounds because they're shooting those threes, they're shooting long jump shots. They're good at going and getting those balls. To me, Auburn's offense will key with how well Auburn defensive rebounds. That's going to be a big part of this one because that can get you in transition because Tennessee will play that style, but they prefer to just kind of keep it and they'll get the ball back and keep it again. And so for Auburn, not just, obviously Dylan Cardwell, Chaney Johnson, but Miles Kelly, we've seen him rebound, but Chad Baker-Mazara, Denver Jones, those guys, I think if you look up the end of this game on Saturday night and you've got 4 or 5 rebounds from, those 3 guys to contribute along with your big guys, that'll be massive because there's going to be opportunities. There's going to be some balls that bounce 15 feet away from the basket on rebounds that somebody's going to go run down. How many of those balls can you run down on the defensive end and keep Tennessee from getting extra possessions? That'll key you and trigger you to get some transition baskets because if you have to set up in the half court, if you got Janai Broome, then Auburn, I think, can be a half-court offense team against pretty much anybody. Without Janai Broome, it's going to be really, really difficult to go and score consistently in the half court against Tennessee.
I mean, to your point, that you're exactly right. How much of a difference did Miles Kelly 10 rebounds against Mississippi State when maybe they weren't, sharing the ball like they usually do, just kind of shutting down those offensive possessions? I mean, it's another Auburn wants to rebound the ball better. Auburn wants to rebound the ball better. They want to do a better job of limiting offensive rebounds. Tennessee is going to come in here number 7 in the country in offensive rebound rate. So it's yet another challenge. Like you mentioned, Jason, that just kind of speaks to this is a well-coached team. Barnes has done it. He's been down the block before. It's a lot like Bruce Pearl's teams where even if they don't have a elite big guy, now Auburn has that this year, but Tennessee doesn't have that. They're going to play to their identity, and they're going to be a physical, scrappy team. That's what you always see from them. Yeah,
and it is, and part of that's how you play in Tennessee because of Chaz Lanier is a more volume 3-point shooting team. Those teams are usually more offensive rebound. Look at Alabama this year. Alabama doesn't have the classic big men rebounding guys, but when you shoot a bunch of threes, you get offensive rebounds because of the bounce. And so for Auburn's guards, be really important. And you're right to kind of get those transition baskets off your offensive rebounds. And if you get some of those that are bounding away and you can get a couple of, numbers looks down the court, then that allows you to maybe get a little bit of transition baskets and, pick up the pace a little bit.
Yeah, I think you could look, obviously in a game like this, you could look up and down the lineup. It's going to be important for everybody to play well. I mean, if Broome can't go, we've sung the praises of Jaheim Hudson already for that Georgia performance. Bruce Pearl did it again today. I thought Todd Pettiford was so important there to provide that sort of scoring splash for them. I keep looking to him because of his ability to just kind of create that explosiveness and draw the gravity. I don't know if anybody else, maybe save for a spot up shot to Miles Kelly. I don't know if anybody else on this Auburn team kind of draws people in like that. And look, we talked about it, last week, a hot start. They did that against Mississippi State. Now this environment is going to be far and away even better. They got off to a 10-0 run against Mississippi State, really kind of set the crowd on fire. Jason, I just touched on it for a second, but College Game Day will be back. That doesn't affect anything about the matchup that we're talking about here, but just incredible for them to have this opportunity once again. I mean, 5th straight season. They're the only team in college basketball to have College Game Day 5 straight years. You don't count the COVID year because they didn't travel at all, but
yeah,
I mean, it's just sort of another notch for them.
Duke will have one before this season's over with, despite the fact that their schedule doesn't really. I mean, they'll do it for Duke, North Carolina, even though Carolina's not very good. But even if the other 2 teams, as Bruce Pearl said, even if Duke and Kansas become the other 2 teams that have it 5 years in a row, in addition to Auburn, to put yourself in the same club as Duke and Kansas at Auburn basketball, I don't know. We keep trying to go, hey, how can you explain it or describe it? As somebody who's followed Auburn basketball since I was able to walk, to see what's happening with Auburn basketball now and College Game Day to be at Auburn basketball, it's hard to even fathom it.
Well, I think our buddy Justin Lee, I thought he brought up a good point this week when it was announced. It does not carry the same weight, I think, as football game day. However, it has become a thing now for Auburn, and they can lean on it. And it gives Auburn an opportunity here to showcase the fans, showcase the arena, showcase the environment, showcase the student section, because, and Bruce Pearl would be the first one to say it, Bruce Pearl is a Hall of Fame coach. Bruce Pearl's not going to be here forever. So they want to make sure that they're showing off a lot of the other things that have been so great of late about Auburn basketball. I think it's been a good marriage, I will say, because, I mean, how many SEC or Auburn basketball fans would have even paid attention to something like that over the last few years? I don't think many, but now it's something that's on their radar. Hey, I wonder if, I mean, we heard it in the offseason. Oh, will game day come when they play Tennessee? Will game day come when they play Alabama? It starts to become a little bit more of a conversation. So I think Auburn sort of taking advantage of the fact that that's become a trend for them.
Yeah, no, it is more about the program than being on game day that day in particular. It's more about the overall program in terms of Auburn basketball, because you're still continuing this climb, and that's part of this climb to go, hey, look, you don't want to be a 1 year, you don't want to be, this is about, hey, let's stay there. And that's the goal right now, is to stay where you are, continue to win, continue to compete for championships, put yourself in a position every year to be a team that has a chance in March and April. And that's what they've been able to do.
5-0 in the SEC, number 1 in the country. Like I said at the top, could be the first of 3 top 10 matchups. Just presently, that's what it would be. We'll see what happens with Florida and Alabama and Auburn the rest of the season. But we're really, really looking forward to it. This is one of those games you circle every single year. Neville Arena certainly never disappoints. I did a story this week, and it was fun kind of walking down memory lane. I mean, the environments they've created over the years. I mean, you can kind of point to different moments, different plays, different sequences that have just shot the roof off of that place. And so no matter what happens, and the result on Saturday should be a really good one. Should be a great environment for Junior Day, Jason, and we'll get to you and Christian talking about that and the visitors that are going to come. But just something I'm sure y'all mentioned as well. The football program couldn't have planned it any, couldn't have had it any better in terms of an environment and a setting that they're going to have these kids.
No, you're right. It's something that for a long time, Auburn football did not have the opportunity to use Auburn basketball as a recruiting tool. That didn't happen. You kept people away from basketball games for a long time from an Auburn football perspective. You're like, hey, well, you can come to campus, but they did it when the basketball team was on the road, because they didn't want to go to a half-empty arena or arena that, say, if it was a Kentucky game where there were more Kentucky fans than there were Auburn fans. That's not the case any longer. You don't have to worry about that. Now the problem is trying to get enough tickets to get everybody in on your Junior Day. And so, yeah, great opportunity. And Auburn basketball is kind of a centerpiece now of a football Junior Day, which is pretty fun.
We will get to that conversation now with Jason and Christian talking about what is a absolutely loaded weekend from the football recruiting front as well. So thank you guys for tuning into this segment. Toss it over to Christian and Jason.
After a little bit of hoops talk ahead of the huge game this weekend, Jason, there's, of course, another aspect in the game this weekend as well, or in the stands, I should say, this weekend as well. A lot of top football recruits. Auburn has saved its big Junior Day for this weekend. Some schools have held multiple kind of smaller ones. Some schools have done a big one already. Auburn is doing its big one this weekend, and Jason, it's absolutely massive. We were just counting up the numbers at the time of doing this, and they're at 34 total guys that we have on our list. That's not even the full list. There's names that we're certainly missing that Auburn already has. Right. We'll continue to get those names going into the weekend. And of the 34, 28 of them are blue chippers. And 3 of those guys are 5 stars. Some of those guys, including guys like Cedarian Morgan, Braylon Womack, Derek Cooper, Jaira Edwards is right there as well, are guys that would be 5 stars if all 32 had been handed out already. They're future 5 stars, basically.
Yeah.
But Jason, it's Big Cat Weekend Junior in a sense this weekend, Junior Day. It's literally that. It's setting up to be that on Saturday.
This is kind of that first opportunity to set the table for what you will do this summer. And now with guys, the guys taking official visits in June and July and doing those types of things, these types of days are even more important because it really sets the table for what's to come. And when you look at it, this is a pretty good table setter for Auburn when you start talking about it. And, we'll get into the list, but, each class is built a little different. Not only what Auburn is going to sign, but throughout the country. And this isn't as big a class in terms of Auburn, probably for offensive line group. That's why you saw them go a little heavier. Kel Ellis would have been in this group. He reclassified, so he comes in as part of this as well. So not as big a group in terms of that. Always going to be big in terms of wide receivers, DBs, those kind of guys. A little more linebacker heavy in this one, and so obviously,
edge rusher.
Some of these guys, yes, edge rushers and those guys. And so I think a fantastic group on paper that we're expecting to be in on Saturday.
Yeah, the name that we're going to start off with, maybe a little bit lost in the shuffle because all the excitement is on 2026 right now, and for good reason. But there is still a name out there in 2025, Omar Mabson, our boy from just down the street at Auburn High, running back who was in 2026 and then reclassified to 2025, taking his official visit this weekend. Was supposed to go to Alabama last weekend. I don't know if that actually happened. Not sure if he took that visit or not. Didn't really see anything coming out of it if it did happen. But he's a guy that Auburn has, once he announced that he was going to reclassify to 2025, Auburn jumped at that opportunity. They have 4 scholarship running backs currently in Jeremiah Cobb, Damari Alston, Darrell Robinson, and Alvin Henderson. But the idea of bringing in Omar Mabson in the summer, 5th scholarship back, layer in that depth chart, get in some more youth to that room. Because, Damari Alston, it feels crazy to say this. He's a senior. Jeremiah Cobb is a junior. Darrell Robinson is a 3rd-year player. I can't remember if he redshirted or not. But either way, he's older as well. So adding, some layered depth to that room would be nice. And Omar is a guy who had 2 fantastic years the past 2 years at Auburn High, a great 7A program there in Alabama. And so he's a guy that Auburn would really like to bring in, and there wouldn't be immediate pressure on him to necessarily contribute. So he's going to take his OV this weekend. So we'll see what comes out of that. Don't have a direct kind of concrete timeline on him outside of February signing day, of course, which I honestly don't even know the date because all kids don't usually end up going to February signing day now. Obviously different circumstances for Omar after reclassifying, but figure that would be probably when he would want to make his decision, would be a signing day one.
So that's what it told me when I talked to him. I guess it was a couple of weeks ago, after that reclassification, he said, it was going to be on or around signing day. The decision would come for him. Be interesting to see what happens. Obviously this guy that Auburn offered a while back, offer started coming in a little bit more for him when he reclassified. And, I think you look at him and, really good relationship with this staff, and obviously came to camps and did some of those things. So I think an interesting dynamic too, in terms of kind of how this thing is set up. Adding Darrell Robinson as an older guy too, you still have that younger availability maybe for playing time with him and Alvin Henderson potentially in the same class.
Yes. Moving on to 2026. This is, I knew it because they were obviously on our list, but just looking at it, if you look at the 24/7 sports rankings for 2026, the top 247 guys that are expected in Auburn on Saturday: Zion Ely, the number 2 player in the country; Tristan Keys, the number 4 player in the country; Emmanuel Iheanacho, the number 5 player in the country; Sedarian Morgan, the number 10 player in the country; Trenton Henderson, the number 12 player in the country. 5, I think I just listed off 5 of the top 12 players in the country are expected in Auburn on Saturday. That is insane. Just to look at the amount of talent, and that's just the very, very top end talent. There's a lot of other guys, and we'll touch on those as well. Jason, I think the first 2 that we should start with, it's hard to start with anyone, but let's go up to Maryland, because those are guys that all eyes are on them. You cannot get them on campus that often just because of where they're from. It's not a Sedarian Morgan. You can't get them to drive down the road for a spring practice. These are setup visits. These are big opportunities for Auburn. Zion Ely committed to Maryland, the edge rusher. Emmanuel Iheanacho offers from coast to coast, the offensive tackle. He has visited previously. Ely has not. And let's go ahead and throw in Jaira Edwards as well, the safety from St. Francis. So Ely and Jaira Edwards are both from St. Francis. Iheanacho is not from St. Francis, but he's from Maryland. Those guys are all close. Getting all 3 of those guys on campus, huge opportunity, especially with your 2025 signees who are already on campus. Not signees anymore; they're freshmen now.
Yeah. No, I think it's huge. So when you start thinking about guys they're familiar with, can tell them, hey, this is exactly what I thought it was. It's better. Hey, come join me. All those things. Yeah, it's huge. And people say pipeline, and go like, how does it work? But at Auburn, we have seen it work, and that was, now it makes me feel old to say this. It was a little more than 30 years ago, but Pat Dye went to Dillard High School and signed Otis Mounts. And then it led to Calvin Jackson and Frank Sanders and Brian Robinson. The Dillard Five, those guys were really good. And you start talking about, the next group on down the line, and you had a Charles Dorsey. And it led to a bunch of guys from that same school, and they were really good players. And so it happens, and it is very much a possibility. And if there's a school in that mid-Atlantic region that you want to get into, it would be St. Francis, because they got a bunch of dudes. And so, Auburn offered another one of those guys on Wednesday, an offensive lineman. It cannot hurt Auburn's chances to have some guys from that area and teammates and guys they're familiar with, to tell them and to welcome them and to see a familiar face when they walk in the door. I think that's a huge part of things for Auburn.
Yeah, we'll see what happens with Ely, already committed to Maryland. He was trying to get down to Auburn last fall for a visit several times. It just didn't quite work out. But Auburn's certainly in the mix with him despite his commitment. Jaira Edwards, he did visit for the Texas A&M game. He released, a top 6 recently. I think Auburn is much closer to 1 or 2 in that top 6 as of right now than they are to 6. So a huge contender there. And then, look, Iheanacho, it's going to be tough, but you're in the mix. He's visiting again. He visited last spring and had maybe one of the most interesting and open recruiting interviews we've ever had after a visit. He said that previous schools that he had just visited were negative recruiting Auburn. I went back to look at the quote, and they had said something about the downplaying the Heismans that Auburn has and stuff like that. And he's like, that wasn't even close to what this was like. He said, I really loved it. And the school he visited right before was Alabama. Funny enough, but that was just that was a very interesting interview. And so he clearly still has interest. So he'll be back, and that's a big deal. Jason, you mentioned, it's tough looking at this list. It's tough to go down the names and pick out a group. Let's go receiver.
Yes.
Because that is, Auburn already has, and I've mentioned it several times. I did it in my 5 storylines to track. I said, could this be another freeze 4, another freeze 5 type situation at receiver? You've already got 2 committed, Denarius Gray and Devin Carter, 2 blue chippers. Tristan Keys is coming in, the number 1 receiver in the country. Sadarian Morgan is coming in, the number 2 receiver in the country. Marquez Daniel is coming in. I think he's the number 15 receiver in the country. Yeah. Auburn would take all 3 of those guys in a heartbeat.
Yeah, and the thing you look at is, you think about, freeze, and you go, the freeze 4, and you go, those guys. Well, you have to think in terms of when these guys would be on campus. So you're talking about, Cam Coleman and Malcolm and Perry and Bryce, and those guys would be third-year guys by the time these guys would potentially be on campus. So you have then a little separation.
And I don't think Cam's going to be here much longer than 3 years.
And that's what you start looking for. You start going to look, create some separation, have some guys, older guys ready to, and then younger guys ready to step in and learn from them. That's how you want to build a room.
And you kind of, I don't want to say took a year off in 2025, but you signed an extremely elite athlete who's very developmental in Derek Smith, and his brother Eric on as well. And then Sam Turner, who's a little bit more solid and maybe a little more well-rounded to start right now. But you kind of, you didn't take a year off, but you're separating the classes a little bit.
It would have been really, really difficult to go back and sign 2 or 3 of those guys in the next class. But 2 years removed, I think you can start to see a pathway to playing time maybe that you would not have seen as much of this year.
But then when you talk about these guys that are coming in, Tristan Keys, the number 1 receiver in the country, one of the biggest things with him is Deuce Knight. He's from Mississippi. Him and Deuce are extremely close friends. Tristan visited last fall. He's close with Marcus Davis.
And that's thing too is JaMychal Garrett and him have struck up a friendship a little bit, longtime Auburn linebacker commitment. And, he talked to him this week as well. And so there's some guys that have a little bit of a connection with a guy like Tristan Keys.
The funny thing about Keys, he competed as a junior in the Under Armour All-American game. Then he went pretty much straight over to Hawaii for the Polynesian Bowl. And he flew straight from there to Miami for Battle Miami for the 7-on-7 event. This is a guy who has impressed, our eval and rankings team
Everywhere.
A ton, everywhere that he's been, despite only being a junior. Cedarian Morgan, look, he's a guy that we've talked about a ton on this show, and for good reason. He is, he's the number 2 receiver in the country, the number 10 player, and you just got to see him play basketball and see just how much of an athlete he truly is.
I don't know that you could start an Auburn list in terms of 2026 guys and not have him at the top, even though he may not be ranked as the number 1 guy.
Well, just look at where Hugh Freeze started.
Yeah, I think if you start going, hey, that we're things we look at. We look at in-state recruiting. Obviously, that's a vitally important thing for Hugh Freeze and his staff, and they've shown that. And this is a guy that they've recruited for a long time. And you got connections. Malcolm Simmons on campus. There's a lot of things going, and it's 35 minutes away, depending on how fast you drive up 280 to get there. And I just watched him play basketball the other night, and it's freakish. It is. You start talking about playing above the rim in basketball, and a guy that's he's still really just scratching the surface in football in terms of route running, all those things. But his ball skills are elite. He's a big physical dude, and so. It would be hard to not put him way, way, way up on the list. And he's a guy that Auburn obviously really, really glad to get back on campus this weekend.
Yeah, and then you talk about receivers that are former high school teammates of Auburn guys on campus now. Marquez Daniel at Booker T. Washington, he's a guy who's continued to shoot up the board. He's big like Cedarian Morgan. He's tall, but he's a little more lanky right now. He's 6'5", like 195. Cedarian is 6'4.5-ish, probably 210, 215. Yeah. So they're different builds. But look, Marquez he's a big priority for Auburn as well. They would take him. Absolutely. He's a guy that, in all honesty, watching him a little closer this weekend, because he's mentioned several times that he could do something early, and how much he likes Auburn, and how much he talks to Joe Phillips. And,
20 minutes away, 30 minutes away, Tuskegee. Down the
road. Moving on from receiver, let's touch on, because I do want to touch on this name real quick, Braylon Womack, the 4-star, future 5-star safety from Mississippi. Auburn offered him. He was going to go visit Tennessee this weekend. He changes those plans. Talking with our Tom Loy a little bit, one of the big things, look, he already had a top 4, and I think it's Alabama, Texas A&M, Tennessee, and maybe I'm missing one in there as well. I don't remember who it is. Point being, he was already kind of starting to trim down his list a lot when Auburn came in. But the Auburn offer changed things for him. One of the big reasons why his sister plays on the Auburn softball team. And so the Womack family is very intrigued by the idea of, potentially being able to get Braylon to Auburn as well, and seeing how he likes it. So I don't think that's a deal breaker per se, but it gives you a boost, and you see that already because he's already getting to campus for a visit.
Yep. You look at a guy like that. Look at a guy like Derek Cooper, and, where does he wind up? He plays all over the field at Chaminade Madonna. Probably could be a strong safety, might be a linebacker. I don't know. He can play pretty much anywhere you want him to. Those are types of guys you look at and start going. Jaira Edwards too. There's a group of guys all of a sudden you look at, again, versatility. We hear it, we talk about it. Versatility in a secondary is extremely important. And those are guys that could give you some versatility and where, they're going to do some things. Nasir McCoy, a guy I talked to this week as well. Kylie, if you start running down this list, this would be a
Zion Gibson,
an hour show just to kind of mention guys. But the versatility in the secondary, that's a very, very valuable thing when you start talking about trying to, we saw it this year for Auburn. You have a couple of injuries. You have a guy that maybe doesn't play as well as you hoped, and all of a sudden you look up and you go, who do we have that can play maybe nickel, but can he play corner, and can he play safety? And all of a sudden you look up and you got a true freshman that's kind of filling in some of those roles and doing it well. And so how many of those guys can you get? A bunch of these guys coming in this weekend, really highly ranked, but really versatile guys that can do a lot of different things.
Yeah, you mentioned Derek Cooper, the elite athlete from Chaminade Madonna, teammates with Denarius Gray, recruited by some schools to play DB. Auburn's kind of flirted with him there, but they like him more so as a running back right now. He'll be in. Xavier Crowell will be in, the recently reclassified running back from 2027 to 2026 as well. Those are two of your, you would think, two of your very kind of top tier guys at running back.
Yeah.
And you're getting them both in on Saturday. So that's a big one. Let's touch on, we talked, man, it is tough. We talked about edge. They're not getting, Tank Jones will not be in. He's going to visit Oregon this weekend, but one guy who will be in, and we'll touch on two names here because we do need to start wrapping it up eventually. We'll touch on Trenton Henderson, the edge from Pensacola Catholic, and then Vodney Cleveland, the interior defensive lineman from Parker, getting both of those guys in this weekend. Vodney been on campus a good bit. Same for Trenton Henderson as well. Vodney was committed to Alabama, backed off that pledge. Think Auburn is firmly right up near the top for him. And look, Trenton Henderson has come out and said it. He said Auburn and Florida State are his top two. I think Auburn is top one at the moment, and he's got a good relationship with Rock Bellantoni, dating back to Rock offering him and recruiting him at FAU. So those are two elite guys, front seven of the defense that are definitely worth paying attention to on Saturday.
Yeah, I agree. And, like I said, Henderson is a really athletic, long guy that, like I said, Rock has been talking to for a long time. And then, Vodney at Parker, but he was at Prattville before that. So just up the road. So, a place that is, has some pretty good Auburn ties. And then you look at Parker, and obviously he played alongside Jordan Crawford, who's on campus now. So you start to think about those two combinations for those guys. And again, important positions. You look at Ohio State and Notre Dame and Texas and these teams that are up there playing Penn State. Defensively, what do they have in common? Guys that can get off the ball on the front. We've talked about it all, for the last 3 or 4 or 5 years for Auburn, being able to play with 4, not have to blitz, and how much impact that has on a defense. That last year's class, you start getting some of these guys like that in this year's class, and all of a sudden you become a defense that can make plays without having to send 5, 6, 7 guys. That's the ultimate goal, and these are the types of guys you're looking for.
Yeah, a couple other or another defensive lineman worth just mentioning real quick, Jermaine Kinsler from Bergen Catholic in New Jersey. He's going to be down along with his 4-star teammate, cornerback Jordan Thomas. Need to touch on real quick Anthony Davis, the linebacker from Grayson, because he's one of the 2026 recruits who's been on campus more than just about anybody else. I mentioned Marquez Daniel as a name we're watching this weekend. Same goes for Anthony Davis. Now, I'm not saying that he's going to commit this weekend. He hasn't come out and he doesn't have a planned date or anything like that. And I'm not saying it's a failure if the weekend comes and goes and he hasn't committed. But he's a guy that we're certainly watching pretty closely, just because of how much he's been on campus and how much Auburn likes him. Another guy that you could kind of throw into that mix as well, 3-star interior offensive lineman Parker Pritchett. Think Auburn is in a good spot there. Don't know if he'll do anything quite yet, but definitely a guy that we're watching. So those are two other names to watch.
Yeah, I agree. And Parker Pritchett was a guy that I was going to bring up, Carver Columbus, but a guy that was from 1st to 5th grade, lived in Auburn. His older brother, Tyler Pritchett, played at Auburn High School, went to North Carolina and played, and he said he's now a head coach in Pennsylvania at a school. And so I did not know that. So, but this guy that had formative years of his life growing up and being in Auburn City schools. And so for him, he said it's like coming back home. And so I think a good relationship with Jake Thornton. I think, obviously that's a guy to watch. And I mentioned Nasir McCoy earlier. I think that's another guy that Auburn has recruited a long time. Crimes had a really long relationship, and then TJ Rushing went to see him pretty quickly out of the gate. So I think those are two guys as well.
Touched on a lot of names. There's still a lot more names on the list as well. Want to give some love to the tight end position.
Yeah, absolutely.
Ben Angamoa is bringing in some dudes this weekend. Caden Prothro, the number 2 tight end in the country, looking at the 24/7 Sports Composite here. Xavier Tiller from Langston Hughes, the Texas A&M commit, who Auburn has been really in the mix for a long time, and felt like they were pretty close with it Big Cat weekend until he ended up going to Texas A&M in the fall. The number 4 tight end in the country. And then Evan Jacobson from Iowa. He'll be in this weekend as well, the number 13 tight end in the country. So 3 of the top 15 tight ends in the nation all in town this weekend for Junior Day. So that's you just signed 2 in 2025. I think Auburn definitely wants another 2 in 2026 there at tight end and getting some really, really good ones on campus.
And really different types of guys. You look at it and, And Caden Prothro is just he's a freak athlete. And Xavier Tiller has a chance to be that guy too. Prothro's a little bigger than him already. And then you look at Jacobson, and he gives me really a lot of Brandon Frazier vibes. You look at his long 6'7" basketball body. His brother was a basketball player that played in college basketball and said, no, I'm going to play in the NFL. And he's kind of played and continued to develop as an NFL guy. Really interesting, after talking to him, that he talked about being here for the Texas A&M game and how impactful that was. He wanted to come back, and that, Auburn's made an impact on him already. I think this is going to be an interesting weekend for a guy, him and Prothro and Tiller. All those guys are basketball guys. To be able to go to a basketball game and see that atmosphere and kind of their reaction, I think that's going to be fun to see.
Yeah, look, and Jacobson, he's from Iowa. He's got a bunch of those Big Ten offers. He actually does not have an Iowa offer, interestingly enough. Yeah. But any tight end from that part of the country, I'm in on.
Yeah,
I'm in on those kinds of tight ends. They usually work out pretty well. So with that, I think we'll probably wrap it up here for Thursday Night Live. Look, like we said, we could keep touching on names, and there's going to be more names. But we've got all that covered at auburnundercover.com. So for those of y'all that are listening that are already subscribers, appreciate you guys being over there. Had a ton of coverage, ton more coverage still to come. We'll obviously have live updates all day on Saturday, rolling throughout the day. Guys will be getting in early. Guys will be leaving late after the 7:30 basketball game.
Yeah, probably be one of those where, because it's such a late basketball game and do that, probably you start to think late morning, lunchtime arrival for guys, and then start to pick up, heading into the afternoon. And then obviously, with this many guys and with such a tough ticket, some guys will go to basketball. Some will have to go home because they're traveling. So there'll be stories kind of really sprinkled throughout the day. So looking forward to a busy, busy Saturday.
Yeah, so it should be fun. Appreciate everyone tuning into Thursday Night Live. Appreciate AU Club for continuing to be with us. We love AU Club. Wish it wasn't so cold out so we could be out there and be out golfing a little bit.
Thankfully, got them covered up and protecting those babies.
Good. Speaking of that, just real quick, Jackson Coyven had a great start to his weekend at the Farmers Insurance.
Yeah, Farmers Insurance out. Yes, and
4 under in
got
day
a
one.
Ton of TV coverage, late afternoon, early evening TV coverage. Auburn gear, those guys, talking.
Auburn got a ton of coverage at TGL on
Tuesday
as well.
So it's been a big week for Nick Kleinert and Auburn men's golf, and getting some national TV coverage. So that's a big deal.
Yeah, so appreciate, Auburn men's golf and Coach Kleinert. They're always great to deal with. Appreciate them. Appreciate AU Club. Appreciate everyone tuning in. Hopefully it's been plugged by Nathan earlier in the show. I didn't get to listen to his part, but if you're not a subscriber at auburnundercover.com, we are running a special for this weekend, 50% off, that you can join us. Went back and we were able to get some of the numbers. Last year we had 2,927 articles on the website. That's about 8 per day. So
that's pretty good.
Yeah, if you want to be a subscriber and at 50% off, you'll get it for less than $5 a month. That's the kind of just written content that you're getting, not even counting the podcasts and the message board and all that kinds of stuff. So you're getting a bunch. So definitely take advantage of that if you're not a subscriber at auburnundercover.com. And Jason, I figure we'll probably hop back on here for another recruiting pod early next week to recap Junior Day. And then, of course, Thursday Night Live again next week. We'll see how that works, because I know you and Nathan will be out on the road. So
we'll have a Senior Bowl next week, and then a hop down to Baton Rouge for Auburn basketball against LSU on a Wednesday night, and be home Thursday. So we'll have some things to talk about next week as well.
Yeah, so it'll be fun.